If you think about how a lot of us are walking around with low-grade anxiety or depression, we're feeling, in many ways, just disoriented. And I'm really thinking that the church needs a reclamation. And it's that reclamation of joy and also celebration. When I think about joy, it comes from this authentic place that I believe is just kind of the flip side of suffering. And in many ways, you look at our African American tradition, which is really American history, and how the historical Black church, in the midst of suffering, in the midst of experiencing real indignities at the hands of not only the government, but also the state, the police, people, somehow, some way, in the church space, in the beloved community, they were able to live out a type of worshipful resistance that took an honest assessment of what was happening in the world, took an honest assessment of Jim Crow, took an honest assessment that there were lynchings happening, they took an honest assessment of segregation, and I could go on. And yet, through the hope of the gospel, by the way, that they were given in a distorted form, they were somehow able to reclaim it and find, in a sense, a song and a story of liberation, even in the midst of, in the shadow of American empire, which is what it is and what it was. And it harkens back in many ways to when I think about the Exodus narrative and the liberation narrative, when they crossed the Red Sea, the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea. The first thing, and this was a woman-led celebration, the first thing they do is they celebrate, and Miriam begins to sing, and they begin to sing songs of celebration that were actually connected and not disembodied from slavery and their oppression and the story of making bricks without straw and all those kinds of things. So even the celebration, right? The heavenly celebration was rooted in a story and a communal memory of suffering, yet God in the midst of it show God's self strong in that. And I think that's where the joy comes. It's not through bypassing or glossing over trauma, but it's in taking it on courageously and inviting the Spirit, inviting God into that place of trauma, inviting community, because it's not something that you do alone, and allowing your trauma to be transformed into, like the old church used to say, it becomes eventually the testimony. And it could be a living testimony, you know, it's not one of those like, this is where I was, this is where I am, everything's all good. But in our days, we're living through a complex grief. So when I think about the embodied Jesus, and all the ways that Jesus saw people and loved people and walked with those who were on the outs and held space at the table with people of ill repute, Jesus was doing that in conjunction with the Spirit. And when I think about the Spirit, I think about community, beloved community, the unity of the bond of the Spirit, and the prayers that the first church did together, where they were discerning matters of the world and even belonging and inclusion, and they had to come to certain conclusions. And one of the conclusions, as we see in Acts 15, when the disciples, right, had to decide whether they were going to include the Gentiles in the fellowship. What does Bishop James conclude? It seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us, right, not to impose a burden that they cannot bear, right? And he was basically drawing discernment from the collective, looking at also the collective memory as Jews in terms of like, how does the law apply and where does it apply? But in the end, the Spirit, as Willie James Jennings, right, a professor at Yale, talks about, would compel us into a new joining and a belonging together. And that's how you know the Spirit is at work. It's not just the gifts of the Spirit or the charisma and even some of the exuberance, which is beautiful as well. But I think we need a different standard in a fragmented society. Like, is there the unity of the bond of the Spirit? Is God working? How do we know? People are loving each other. People are serving each other. People are giving up their belongings. They're being generous. How do you know the Spirit is present? People are being liberated. Where the Spirit of God is, there is liberty. And that happens not just on this like soul level, this ethereal level, but it's, you know, it's people getting out of prison. It's and finding flourishing. It's people working through stories of trauma, and through the church and through community, we would hope, finding spaces of resilience and also joy and a new way of being and belonging. The church has a lot of PR work to do, in particular the American church. Because the church is to be aspirationally emblematic, embodying something greater, right? And that would be the love of Christ. But that's not what it's known for. So think about this, and I'm going to use kind of like these banal examples, but I think it'll go somewhere. I went through a little exercise with my church, and I put up a bunch of symbols with no words. Just like, what does this symbol mean to you? The golden arches. And people were like, oh, French fries. that was their response. It wasn't McDonald's. It was like, man, them fries are killer. You know, I put up the Nike swoosh, and people felt like, I feel like going for a jog right now, right? And this is without any caption, any words, or anything like that to describe what's there. These are things that are logos, branding. They have, you know, kind of real estate in our brain. So these are the associations that we make with these quote unquote brands. Wouldn't it be beautiful is that when people saw the church, that they would right away think about love? That would be our quote unquote brand. And we need a reclamation, we need a reformation. And that's a reformation of beautiful, radical love. And I heard someone recently describe radical love as something that's just beyond acceptance. Because acceptance is like, I think she says, it's static. It's just there, right? But when, you know, Jesus talked about love, as even in the conversation with the woman at the well, he said rivers of living water, right? Something that was movemental, something that flowed, something that makes you feel satiated. I know when I get around the church, true, good, beautiful, redeemed people in process, I know that I come away from those interactions feeling satiated, loved, even, not just accepted. And we need more of that love in more places. We need more faithful communities to rise up and say, maybe in the end of days, when we meet our Maker, you know, Paul will say, we got some of his letters wrong. Some of the psalmists were saying we didn't preach that right. John would probably say about the apocalypse, man, you guys were just like taking it. I know I was weird. You guys took it somewhere else. But in the end, will it be said that we were known for our love? Which is what was a dying man's last wish. What was one of Jesus's last prayers? Oh, Father, that they would love one another, and that they would be known for their love. That's how people will know that they're his disciples. I think if we get that right, and man, if we've messed up on some of the other stuff, hey, so be it. But I'll go down with love, because I think at the end of the day, love will lift you up.
Yeah.
On the third day, I start preaching now. In the beginning, God created, and then we see some sort of fragmentation happened in the beginning. 5 days God creates, God said it's good. On the 6th day, God creates people and sees the totality of everything God created and then says all good, right? Tov me'od, right, in the Hebrew text. And so when I think about what happened in the beginning, right, I think about how shalom came unraveled. Right. So if shalom is about harmony and right relationships, what happens when things are emphatically really good? Then what is sin? Because we often think of sin and relegate sin to being about behavior. But people who focus on sin as a behavior will recognize that it's a thin view of sin. And if you have a thin view of sin, guess what? You're going to have a thin view of grace. You have a thin view of grace, your gospel is not going to be robust. And what creation, if we look at that creation narrative in Shalom, then we're seeing at all of these different types of harmonies. There's interpersonal harmony between people. There's harmony with creation and the land. There's harmony with the animals. There's a naming. There was a sense of vocational harmony. So what happens when that stuff is no longer good or very good? Well, that's the impact of sin. So that means that we're going to see racism as a result and impact of sin. We're going to see our relationship to the land be the way that it is, a commodification, a usurping, a taking over instead of an honoring, and looking at land as connected to God's larger ecosystem. So when I teach about sin, I teach about how, as one theologian describes it, as an unraveling of shalom. So we think about I think about my abuelita and how she knit scarves, and then you take a 2 or 3 year old José who goes there and pulls the thread. What happens to the scarf? Well, it unravels. The stitching is no longer in harmony and in right relationship. So when we're preaching this gospel, this good news, is to say that in Christ, through the church, there's this good news and possibility of making right what has become wrong, of reweaving that which has been unraveled. And it happens through beauty, through truth, and it happens through justice. And because we can't talk about reconciliation and union without being able to name what's wrong in the first place, without being able to name the fissures, right? The tattered threads. And we know what those tattered threads are in our day and age, in our society. And the church needs to identify those. You can't be about everything, because then you won't be good at anything as a church, right? But can the church go into neighborhoods and communities and see what's tattered and join together in the mending and the healing of people and communities and places, businesses, economies? Our gospel is holistic because guess what? Creation is a story about wholeness. So participating in God's good news and the restoration of all things would be to say that our vocation is about mending. It's about healing. It's about reclaiming those things which have been lost along the way because of the story of sin.